The main character of the show through the big streets of the huge city of Jiangcheng around were high-rise buildings. The guy saw a girl walking next to him. All her attention was absorbed by her smartphone. The protagonist came up behind the girl and lightly touched her hand. She was still working on her smartphone. The guy told the girl that her soul was blackened and that there would be a bloodbath today. The girl was surprised. The protagonist looked at the girl with a long, startled look. He was silent. Then the guy told the girl it was better to spill some blood in a hurry to prevent the consequences. The girl looked at the boy in surprise. She asked him in disbelief if he had offered to spill some blood. The girl turned away and went into her bag. She said she had to have some tissues and couldn't forget them. The girl called the guy a dirty pervert and said she was no longer a virgin. She added that she wouldn't date him. The guy wondered if he'd only made a kind remark to a girl, and he'd already been called a pervert. He marveled that women in the city had changed in 5 years. In the end, the guy thought happily to himself that this city wasn't Kunlungshu after all. He remarked to himself that immortals were everywhere, and their reaction was justified. The boy was born into a family in Jiangcheng. He was bullied by his peers, but he grew up in a happy family. 5 years ago, the tragedy ended tragically with the father of a boy who saved a little girl. A man in high places didn't like it. A couple of days later, at a banquet at Yunhu's villa, the guy's family was wiped out. He's the only one who escaped. All of his family acquaintances along with his father's former friends, and his grandfather, no one did anything. They stood there and watched. The protagonist decided to take his own revenge and kill the man responsible for the death of his family with his own hands. The protagonist grabbed a knife and ran with it very fast against his enemy with the desire to kill him. Suddenly, the man touched the knife and it shattered into small pieces. The man said that the Yi family from Jiangcheng was nothing, and that he could easily kill them with one hand. The man asked the boy in surprise if he really wanted to kill him with that knife. The man looked menacingly at the boy. He decided to finish him off so that he wouldn't survive. Eventually, the boy's young mother threw him into Dongqian Lake. If his mother hadn't done that, the bandits wouldn't have spared him. The boy was saved by my master. He took him with him to Kunlungshu. After that, he gained the ability to summon ghosts and spirits. After a long apprenticeship, the master instructed the boy to return to Jiangcheng City. The protagonist swore to himself that all his enemies would be held accountable. Suddenly, the guy was surrounded by a very dark aura. He couldn't understand what had happened and why his body wasn't moving. The protagonist was startled to feel that the oppressive atmosphere was making it very difficult for him to breathe. After some thought, the boy decided confidently to himself that all this had happened because of an evil spirit. The protagonist threw his fist aside and shouted that someone had been caught. The people around them were surprised and stopped. They could not understand what had happened and what was wrong with them. The main character was able to jump up very high on the building at that time. The protagonist thought and said that he first had to fulfill the old man's task since that day a long time had passed, and revenge would have to wait for now. Jiangcheng Huame Group Corporation is one of the largest in China. This firm is the leading organization in Jiangcheng City. The main character went to the entrance of the corporation. He needed to find a girl named Xia Zhoxue. 3 days ago, an old man found out that within 100 days, Xia Zhoxue's girlfriend may be in trouble and die. Inside the protagonist is a sleeping dragon with purple qi. That's why they sent him. The main character stood near the entrance to the building. He fixed his cap and decided to go in and find the right girl. The main character's path was blocked by guards who yelled for the guy to stop. The guy smiled at the guards and asked if they knew a man named Xia Zhoxue. He added that he was looking for her. The guard asked the guy strictly if he had an appointment with Mrs. Xia. He also added that unauthorized persons were not allowed to enter. The guy excitedly told the guards that he was on very important business and needed to meet the girl in person. The guy smiled and told the guards that he could safely wait for the girl sitting on the couch. The guards started yelling at the guy. One of the guards asked who the lady was supposed to meet. Another guard asked the guy where he had come from and whether he was worthy of seeing the lady at all. The protagonist got very angry and sternly questioned the guard about what he said. After that, the protagonist activated his power and neutralized the 2 guards. Then both guards fell to the ground. They didn't even realize what had just happened to them. The guard asked, wondering what had just happened. The other said he thought he was dead. The guy told the guards to watch what they say or something will happen. The main character asked the other employees why they hire such unqualified workers. After which, the protagonist sat in a big chair waving his cap. The guy smiled and told the employees to call their boss. At that time, people were running in all directions around the office building. They were very excited and frightened. The main character was wary. He didn't understand what was going on. The guy saw traces of a negative aura. There was the stomping of many feet as a group of armed guards approached the room. One of the employees pointed the guards at the protagonist, and the guy was surrounded on all sides. The head of security approached the protagonist. The guy turned around and looked at him carefully. The supervisor said he was the captain of the security division. He asked the other guy if he had thought about the consequences of breaking into the building. The protagonist replied to the boss menacingly that he had a big and important business with Xia Zhoxue's girlfriend, and that he should not stand in his way. The warden got scared and worried. He noticed that there was something wrong with the main character, as if he smelled blood, and as if he could crush them all. Then the head of security told the guy politely that Mrs. Zhao was not in today. He told the guy to leave his contacts when the lady came to visit. He would inform her about the visit. The protagonist said annoyed that there was nothing to be done. The boss was glad that the guy believed his words. The guy told the guards that he had nothing to do, so he could sit there all day. The head of the security service was surprised. The boss realized he couldn't let the guy stay here at this rate. He could lose his job, so he made a big decision. After which the boss told his subordinates to immediately capture the protagonist. Suddenly someone shouted from outside for everyone to stop. Immediately the head of the guard was surprised. The protagonist turned sideways to see who had just entered the room. The guy was still sitting in the chair and the guards were standing around him at the same time a girl with purple hair entered the room. The girl commanded the guards to leave the main character for her. One of the workers asked a friend who the pretty girl was. The guy said that the girl was the director of Sun & Sun. The lad added that in beauty in their company, this girl could only be matched by President Xia Zhoxue. The head of the guard told the girl that it was very dangerous here. The girl told the guard that he could go. The girl told the protagonist that her name was Sun, and asked with interest how she could help him. The protagonist was very surprised to hear the name from the girl. A great memory immediately came over him. The protagonist looked at the girl and thought that he was the one he couldn't forget in these 5 years, Sun and... Throughout elementary school, the guy sat with this girl and they had a very good relationship. After the transition to middle school, their communication stopped. After a tragic accident at the villa, the protagonist returned home, but he could not get there. Their house was already sealed. All families turned their backs on the protagonist's family, and the company his father founded was assassinated. It turned out that the whole capital was at the mercy of one man. The girl's son, despite the pressure of others to resist all the rumors, and took from the morgue of the body of the parents of the protagonist, and took to the cremation of the guy, still could not understand how such a fragile girl had a lot of strength. The protagonist didn't realize he'd meet this girl again someday. Sun turned to the guy and asked if he was standing too close to her, and the main character apologized. The girl smilingly asked the protagonist how she could help him since he had come here for some reason. The protagonist smiled at the girl and said cheerfully that he thought as if he had seen her somewhere before. Sun told the guy he was using a very old-fashioned method of starting a conversation. The girl said if the protagonist wanted to wait here, let him wait here. She asked the workers to keep the noise down. The guy looked at the girl and thought to himself that she had changed a lot. The protagonist thought about Sun's breasts, and he noticed to himself that she had really changed a lot. After a bit of thought, the guy decided that the plans had completely changed now. The girl Sun went down to the garage and walked over to her car. She opened the door with the remote. The girl walked to the door and prepared to open it to get in. Suddenly something very much caught the girl's attention. She looked in the mirror. Sun noticed with very great surprise that the main character was sitting in the back seat. The main character sitting in the back seat cheerfully greeted the girl and called her a hottie. The girl turned to the guy and asked him excitedly when he had time to enter the car. Sun sternly and apprehensively asked the protagonist what he wanted from her now. The protagonist calmly asked the girl for a ride, as if nothing had happened, and asked the guy in surprise if he wasn't expecting someone. He replied that it was not important, and that they could go. The girl told the guy to introduce himself. She can't let a stranger sit in her car. The protagonist thought to himself that he would tell the girl his name. At that time, he scrutinized her aura. The guy noticed that the blackened soul and the blood trail are a harbinger of things to come. He can't let it happen. Out loud, the guy said his name is Ye Chung. There was a meeting with a large number of guests in a huge and tall corporation building. There were a lot of people around the festively set table, and Sun Girl came in here with the main character. The girl walked between the rows with the guy, and the surrounding people looked at them in surprise and admiration. One of the guests asked who was the girl with such a beautiful figure. Another guest replied that it was Mrs. Sun and she was the director of the company. Someone asked who the guy next to the girl was. It was the first time Mistress brought such an ordinary man to the party with her. The girl and the guy walked over to a big table. She said they should sit here. The protagonist had no problem being willing to sit here. The girl rejoiced and looked at a Chen. Suddenly someone from outside called out to the girl. She turned around and looked carefully. One man called himself Guo Haidong and asked the girl to sit down at the table. Another guest called himself Qian Chong. Another man asked the girl if she would mind if he sat down. Gradually the girl around began to approach various guests. All of them wanted to socialize with her. The surrounding men raised their glasses and said that it was not easy to meet the Sun Girl, and they offered her a drink. Suddenly the protagonist snatched the wine glass from the hands of the girl surrounding, very surprised. Guy E. Chen, holding a glass in his hands, asked the people around him how many more glasses he had to drink. The surrounding guests angrily asked the guy who he was and who had always let him in. The protagonist threateningly told one of the guests that he would answer to him for being a pauper. Sun Girl reached out her hand to the guy and said that drinking wine was not how she asked him to provide it for her. Sun told those around her that she wasn't very good at drinking wine, so she only wanted to take one sip. She asked if those around her understood. All the guests looked at the girl with happy looks and told her cheerfully that they understood her. Suddenly, a young boy came up. He asked if one sip would be too little for Sun. A young guy appeared among the guests. He was walking towards the girl and holding a bottle in his hand. Sun Girl was very surprised to see a young guy. She called him by his name, Chen Feng. One guest said that Chen Feng was the second young master. Someone told the story that last time the girl sung and splashed wine on Chen Feng. He was very angry about it, and told her threateningly that he'd fallen foul of her last time too. Now she must drink a bottle to atone. The guy looked menacingly at the girl and said it wasn't a request but an order for her. Sun's girlfriend said that if she drank too much, she'd cause trouble for others. She said she would only drink one glass. The girl remembered that last time she thought there were drugs in her glass, so she spilled it on Chen Feng. The guy told the girl very insistently that he had booked the presidential suite so she would have a place to sleep. He brought the bottle to the girl and told her to drink it already. Sun got worried. She realized that Chen Feng wouldn't just leave her alone and remembered that there were cases of girls taking drugs because of this guy. The guy menacingly told the girl to drink. Chen Feng reminded that even the impeccable Xia Zhexue was drinking today. The girl remembered that Chen Feng was born in an ordinary family. He dropped out of school early to join the society, and it was not easy for him to become a principal with such an ego. The girl thought that she was absolutely nothing compared to Chen since he was the son of a noble family. Suddenly, the main character ran up from the side and snatched the wine bottle from Chen Feng's hands. The main character lifted the bottle above his head at this. Chen Feng was very surprised and angry. The angry Chen Feng looked at the protagonist and called him a son of a bitch. At the same time, Chen Feng saw with fright as the protagonist swung the bottle with all his might. He ended up hitting Chen Feng on the head with a bottle with all his might. Chen Feng fell to the floor. He angrily shouted that he was hurt and asked the protagonist who he was. Chen Feng asked the boy how he dared to hit him. He also added that even his own father had not hit him. The girl looked at the protagonist with excitement. Yi Chen asked the guy who he was, if he wanted to make the girl's son, and drink. The surrounding guests were very surprised and frightened by what had just happened. Some of the guests realized that the main character doesn't know Chen Feng, who is the young master of the Chen family in the city. Another guest thought excitedly to himself that the Chen family is far from the last in politics. A man told the protagonist that there was a strong warrior in the Chen family. One guest thought that the protagonist would not live to see tomorrow because he had gone against Chen Jr. himself. Some of the guests thought the protagonist had been provoked. Sun Girl and said frightened to Mr. Chen that she agreed to drink any amount of wine today as long as he would let her go. Then Chen Feng hit the girl with all his might. He asked her who gave her the right to make conditions for him. At the same time, Chen Feng kicked his opponent in the groin. Chen Feng shrank in pain. He could not say anything and struggled to catch his breath. Chen Feng fell to the floor and shouted very angrily to the main character that he was going to kill him. The protagonist grabbed his opponent's head and asked angrily who he was going to kill. Immediately afterwards, he knocked his opponent's head to the floor with all his might and said that they would see who would die first. Unsure, someone shouted menacingly at the protagonist to stop. He noticed how quickly a whole group of guards appeared next to him. The man glared menacingly at the protagonist and demanded strictly that he let Chen Feng go. The protagonist was sitting on the floor with Chen Feng underneath him. There was a very long pause. There were many guards around. The man shouted angrily at the main character to let Chen Feng go. One of the guests said that the man was the head of a family named Chen Zhengguo. They understood why he came here. One of the guests said that next to the head of the Chen family is a strange, short man who is most likely a legendary warrior. The girl was frightened because even Chen Zhengguo himself had already come here. The young boy shouted for his father to save him. The girl thought and really wanted to save the protagonist now. Suddenly, Chen smiled at everyone around him and let go of Chen Feng's hands. The protagonist took a close look at the old man who approached. He was very interested in him. At the same time, the boy Chen Feng ran up to his father very quickly and joyfully. The protagonist looked at the old man and saw a strong aura in him. He decided that the old man was an ancient Chinese martial arts master. A guy complained to his father that the protagonist took his girlfriend Sunbai away from him. He asked his father to avenge him. The man rudely and abruptly yelled at the guy to shut up and get out of here. Then the head of the Chen family turned to the old man and called him Ming Lao. He asked the old man to tell him the origin of the protagonist. The old man said that the guy was also an ancient warrior, but because of his age, it wouldn't take long for him to enter the force. The protagonist looked at the man and asked with interest what he wanted to accomplish. The head of the family said he's already lost his reputation and there's nothing left for him to do. Then the man told the old man that if the protagonist asked for mercy to leave his body. The old man told the protagonist that he would have a hard time dealing with such power at a young age. He told the girl that he would take care of the old man. The old man looked menacingly at his rival and said that he had been messing around with people he shouldn't have. The protagonist carefully looked at the old man. He was preparing to repel this warrior's attack. The protagonist watched carefully and calmly as the warrior rushed at him with all speed. The old man ran up to the protagonist very quickly and grabbed his shoulder. The warrior looked at him threateningly and said that if he begged for mercy, he would keep his body. The guy was surprised at such words from the old man. Son, and surprised that everything happened very quickly, the girl wondered if the old man is an ancient warrior. He grabbed the warrior by the hair and asked him if he had already chosen a coffin for himself and if his family had given him a gift. The old man was very angry. He realized that the protagonist had decided to make him very angry. The warrior swung to hit the guy. He shouted that he would surely die now. Yi Chen was able to very carefully dodge the old man's attack. The warrior was unable to hit the guy. And then, the protagonist punched the old man in the face with all his might. He wasn't expecting it. After the powerful blow, the warrior fell to the ground. He could not attack the guy in any way. From the main character's blow, the old man fell completely unconscious to the floor. Standing up and looking at the lying warrior said that he used stealth attack instead of martial arts. The girl was fascinated by what she had just seen. The guests of the event were very surprised. Also, the old man's defeat greatly frightened and surprised the head of the Chen family and his son. The protagonist looked cheerfully at the people around him and asked who was next. The head of the Chen family could not understand how the protagonist was able to defeat the mighty warrior Ming Lao. He couldn't understand why it had happened like that. Gradually, the old man began to come to his senses. He looked at the guy and said that he couldn't possibly have that kind of power. The protagonist looked at the warrior with great attention and asked who he thought he was. Then he shouted to the old man to listen to him. The boy's loud shout startled everyone around him. The old man felt the voice of the protagonist hit his ears with all his might. The people present didn't understand what was going on and why the guy was screaming so loudly. Someone shouted that it hurt his ears. Suddenly, the protagonist walked right up to the man. He asked him simply if his name was Chen Zhengguo. The head of the family looked at the boy with hatred and concern. Yi asked the man if he had a good heart and would leave the body. The main character reminded himself that the Yi family had hated the Chen family before. The man ordered his guards to grab the protagonist as quickly as possible. He shouted to his subordinates why they were standing still. The guards rushed forward and one of them shouted to his boss to remember to raise their wages. The guards surrounded the protagonist on all sides. They were not afraid of him at all, as the guy was only one. Suddenly, the protagonist realized a hand up and activated a special skill. All the guards flew apart. After which he began to professionally beat the guards who ran up to him. After the beating, the protagonist told the beaten guards that ordinary people obey and walk away. Then the protagonist heard a noise from outside and the head of the household addressed him. A man told the protagonist that he had raised his son wrong and asked him to keep them alive. Chung Feng told the guy to forgive him. He didn't know that son's girlfriend belonged to the protagonist. After a short pause, he shouted menacingly to father and son that debts must be repaid. A policewoman entered the room. She shouted at everyone present to stop. At that time, the protagonist stood in the center of the room with a father and son kneeling next to him. The policewoman gave the protagonist a stern and scrutinizing look and told him to get away from people. Suddenly, the policewoman was very surprised to see the protagonist and the father and son next to him. The policewoman was surprised to see Chen Zhengguo on his knees. She didn't understand what the guy had done again. The arrival of the policewoman made the head of the family very happy, and he thought they were saved. The man looked at the protagonist and thought that the ancient masters were absolutely worthless before the powers that be. At the same time, the policewoman was even more surprised. She looked at the old man lying there. The policewoman was surprised to think that she was seeing an ancient warrior of the Chen family. The policewoman scrutinized the protagonist and couldn't guess what this guy had done. At the same time, a guy walked up to the head of the Chen family and grabbed his hair with his hand. Yi Chen told the policewoman that Chen Feng's boyfriend had molested a noble woman and he bravely defended her. At that time, the father of the Chen family was screaming in pain, at which time the policewoman drew her weapon. She shouted for the protagonist to let the man go or she would shoot him. The guy looked closely at the policewoman and said he was very surprised to see a female captain. Then the protagonist told the policewoman that it was a private matter and she couldn't interfere. He was still holding the man's head. The policewoman was surprised. She thought that even if there was an ordinary fight, the police had to intervene. Then the female captain ordered the guy to keep his head straight and sit on the floor. She said it was a second warning. He looked threateningly at the policewoman and told her he didn't think so, and an aura started to activate around the guy. At this time, the girl's son came up behind the protagonist and grabbed his arm. Sun turned to the audience and told them to excuse him because he had problems with his arms and legs due to cramps. The girl said excitedly to the protagonist that it would be better if they stayed here. He asked why they would do that. The girl gave him a stern look and threatened him that if he didn't stop, she would leave him. The main character was surprised that the girl would leave him because of such small things. Suddenly, he calmly sat down on the ground. Sun shouted to the policewoman that the guy had surrendered and not to shoot. The main character asked the girl what he should do now, if he should just sit and wait. Sun told the guy not to worry and leave everything to her. The girl told the protagonist that he had to go to the department. In the statement, he should write that they were not involved. Sun promised that everything would be fine because the guy was defending himself. The protagonist calmly replied to the girl that he didn't care at all and could leave at any time. The protagonist was brought to the police station where a female captain was investigating. An employee walked into the police department office to report something to his boss. The employee told the female captain that they had watched the hotel surveillance video 10 times. The cop said they've reviewed the entire video except for one camera. All other cameras show that the protagonist acted in self-defense. The female captain was very much surprised to hear such news from her subordinate. The policewoman interrogated with great interest to her subordinate what happened to one camera. The policeman showed the chief various video folders on his computer. The policeman said that the videotape showed the head of the Chen family bringing an old man and approaching the protagonist. The female captain watched and analyzed the video with great interest. The subordinate explained in the videotape that in one of the shots, the old man fell down. And the police don't know what happened at that moment. The female captain was deep in thought. The policewoman thought to herself that they had reacted rather quickly, but there was still the possibility that someone might have erased the tape. The female captain realized very clearly that behind the protagonist could be hiding a very great power. The female captain said judiciously that because there was insufficient evidence they might consider it self-defense, she ordered that he be released. The girl's son met the guy outside the exit to the police department. She told him cheerfully that she was right. The girl told the main character that the weather was nice. Sun said that after she got home, she would go straight to the shower. The protagonist listened to the girl's word but remained silent in response. He was in deep thought. The guy decided that Chen Zhen and his son are a threat to Sun Yi's girlfriend. If he leaves Zhangcheng City now, they will go after the girl again. After much deliberation, the guy finally decided that he needed to find time to deal with the father and son Chens. Sun looked at the guy carefully. She thought she always sensed from him an indescribable danger. The main character has a lot of fun, asking the girl why she's looking at him so intently. The guy said he'd walk the girl out if she told him now where she lives. The protagonist told the girl that he had just moved to Zhangcheng and couldn't find a place to sleep yet. He would have to sleep on a bench in the park. The girl looked at the protagonist and told him cryptically that he didn't need to find a place to sleep. Sun said they could go to her house, and her apartment had a spare room for the main character. He asked the girl with interest if she was afraid that he might do something bad. The guy also asked her if she wanted to touch his body, and told the guy that no one wants his body. If the guy doesn't want to go to her, then he doesn't have to. Ichin hurriedly answered the girl that he wanted to go to her. At that time, a female captain was sitting in the car. She thought to herself that in the Chen family, all the guards were former special forces. The cop was looking at the main character with the girl. She thought the guy didn't even seem to notice. The female captain picked up the phone. She thought it would be difficult for her to figure it out on her own and needed to find someone who could help. A policewoman called an acquaintance and asked if he was on assignment and apologized for the inconvenience. She sent him the video and wanted him to watch it. At the same time, there was someone hiding all alone in Siberia in the Ural Mountains. In a small house near the big mountains, a man lived all alone. The guy sitting on the bed said that his little sister is restless if she decides to be a cop. She should be ready for anything while she keeps turning to him. The guy said he's the captain of a unit called the Dragon Spirit. He's not a movie cop. The guy slid his hand over to the laptop and decided to watch the tape he'd gotten from his sister after all. After that, the fighter looked carefully at the notebook. He thought to himself that he was in enough trouble. The guy was watching a videotape of a group of guards running towards the protagonist. The fighter cheerfully thought to himself that the bodyguards should have quit if they got by such a weak guy. The guy looked carefully at the video and was interested in the fighting movements of the main character. The fighter thought to himself in surprise that the protagonist should be an ancient warrior, but in reality, he is not a warrior. The fighter thought to himself that the skill level of the protagonist is the peak of possibility. Yi Chen is a true master of martial arts. Then the fighter decided he needed to contact his sister urgently and picked up the phone. The brother called and told his sister excitedly that he wanted to immediately find out as much as he could about the guy in the videotape. At that time, the protagonist and his girlfriend were at her home in the Zhangcheng apartment complex. Sun came out of the shower room and told the main character that she was done and he could go now. The girl informed the protagonist that the bathroom was free. He got ready to go and take a bath. The protagonist thought to himself, He was very surprised that the girl really didn't suspect anything. He went into the shower room and turned on the water, so he had time to clean himself and think hard. The protagonist stood steaming in the shower and reminisced. He thought that 5 years ago when his teacher saved him, he thought it was a blessing, but in reality it was the beginning of a nightmare. The first day, the old man threw the protagonist into a cage with no explanation and a hungry tiger inside. While the protagonist was able to use his skills to neutralize the dangerous predator, he survived, although he was badly injured by a wild predator. The worst part for the guy was that this was just the beginning of the ordeal of his life. The old man would send the protagonist into dangerous places. In this way, he toughened him up. The protagonist had to escape from very dangerous and bloodthirsty predators. I ended up in a lot of desperate situations. In the end, the guy always survived very difficult and dangerous trials. The only way a person can feel alive is if he is constantly in anger and hatred. The protagonist decided angrily that he would find everyone who was at that banquet. He once again thought very angrily and decided to himself that all his offenders would pay for everything. Sun was in the kitchen at the time preparing food. Suddenly she was thinking about something important. The girl realized that the protagonist had nothing to change until later. She realized she should have asked about it earlier. Suddenly the girl remembered that her clothes were left in a basket in the bathroom. The girl got really excited because she forgot to hide her clothes. The girl excitedly and shyly wished to herself that the guy wouldn't see her clothes. Sun opened the bathroom door and told the protagonist not to come out while she needed to get one thing. The protagonist, standing naked in front of the girl, asked what she had to take away. Sun was very much agitated and confused. She didn't know what to say to the protagonist. The main character looked at the girl and told her to wait until he got dressed. The girl was very embarrassed. She shouted to the guy that she was coming out and apologized for interrupting him, and quickly ran into her room and slammed the door behind her. The boy stared at her silently. The girl plopped down on the bed and repeated loudly to herself that she hadn't seen anything at all. He decided to himself that the girl wasn't coming out again today. He had a lot of free time on his hands. The guy thought to himself that it was a good thing he was on his own now. He had some things to deal with once again. Late one night at the villa of the Chen family, there was an important meeting between father and son. The father and son of the Chen family were alone in the room discussing recent events. The head of the household was very angry and literally shaking with hatred. The son was sitting with his head bandaged. He told him not to be afraid because he was also dizzy. The father punched his son in the face and said that he had seriously injured Minglao because of him. Now only the grandfather can protect the Chen family. The frightened son suggested that his father call someone since he was fooling around in there anyway. Dad said he wouldn't let it go until the main character got what he deserved. After that, the head of the family told his son to go to Wushan tomorrow and let Grandpa come down. The boy was happy and decided that Grandpa would definitely teach the protagonist a lesson. The guy dreamily thought to himself that he will break the main character's arms and legs, will tear off in front of him the clothes of the girl's son, and... Suddenly, someone from outside from the darkness said something about a Chen's woman. The protagonist came down the pitchfork window. He cheerfully asked the father and son if they were looking in. The guy and the man were very scared and surprised to see the protagonist in their house. After that, the protagonist quickly jumped out of the window and sat down in a chair. The protagonist suggested to the father and son that they talk now. The boy Chen Feng timidly asked if he had really come to kill them. The father told his son to calm down as the protagonist would not dare. At this time, the protagonist began to activate his skills. He looked menacingly at the father of the family and asked if he was so sure. Chen Feng looked at the protagonist and said with a crooked smile that he was really confident. Suddenly, Chen Feng felt as if he was being squeezed by something very hard, and it was hard to breathe. Yi Chen asked the guy very snidely if he thought he couldn't kill a man. The protagonist raised his hand and there were purple flames around it. He said they could check it out right now. The man shouted very excitedly and didn't understand why his son. The man was very much frightened. In a trembling voice, he told the protagonist that they had no claim. Such words made him laugh. He didn't understand how the father of the family could have any complaints about him. Then the protagonist reached out to the man and told him to answer an important question. The main character asked the father of the family if he remembered 5 years ago the banquet at Yonghu Villa when the Yi family was killed. The man asked the guy in a trembling voice how he knew. Then he put his hand to the man's face, and the father of the family asked with fright if the main character was the same boy who had fallen into the lake. A terrified man asked the protagonist how he managed to survive. He decided to say something to the man before he killed him. The protagonist said he was not an ancient warrior. A surprised man heard the guy say he was the god of medicine. The guy said that a man thinks a martial artist is the peak of skill. It makes no difference to him who is behind him, whether he is a martial artist or a cult. The protagonist threw the man's hand to the ground. He added that he could kill anyone with one punch. The same day, the city of Jiangcheng shook. The father and son of the Chun family were killed. At the same time, a very powerful warrior was meditating far away on Mount Huishan. This famous warrior's name was Chen Yuanli. He came from the Chen family. Warrior continued his meditation, and at this time from the mountains around him there were blue lightnings. Suddenly something hit the warrior very hard. Chen Yuanli felt that something had happened. The warrior suddenly interrupted his meditation. He even coughed up a little blood. The warrior wondered angrily what had happened to Zhengguo. He wondered if he was dead. He couldn't understand who dared to beat his men from Zhangcheng City. The warrior looked up to the sky and said he swore he would find the asshole and behead him. At the same time, the protagonist was in the building at his girlfriend Sin's apartment. He was in a state of meditation with fire dragons flying around him. The protagonist came out of meditation and opened his eyes. Something stirred him very much. Chen relaxed after meditating and exhaled some of his fire aura. The guy thought that Huaxia's aura was extremely weak. That being said, it was completely incompatible with this place. He should practice as much as possible. He remembered that the day of his parents' death would come in a week, and that he would have to visit them. The guy remembered that this black stone was a gift from his father, but he still doesn't know exactly what it is. The guy saw the inscription. He read it carefully. It said something about a drop of blood. The protagonist wondered what would happen if a drop of blood was dropped on a rock. Suddenly, the stone started to change in a very big way. The guy was amazed at it. The black stone was shrouded in a small flame. It floated in the air in front of the protagonist. He thought to himself relaxedly that he was dizzy. He decided to himself that he would not last long. Suddenly, the protagonist was transported to a completely unfamiliar and mystical place. It was the otherworldly cemetery. He was lying in the middle of a cemetery with ghost graves and many swords stuck in the ground around him. Gradually, the guy started to come to his senses. He felt that he had a very bad headache. As he looked around him, he saw that the entire surrounding space was covered in black fog. A little closer, the protagonist was very much surprised and frightened by the place where he was. He was in the graveyard of rebirth and couldn't understand what the hell was happening to him. Suddenly, some suspicious and dangerous noise caught the boy's attention. He looked around. The protagonist saw swords falling from the sky around him and straight into the ground. Swords kept falling from the sky. The protagonist looked up. In the sky, the boy saw a huge and angry demon with burning red eyes. The demon said threateningly to the boy that he, being in the late stage of life, dared to enter the graveyard of rebirth. Then the demon extended his paw to the protagonist and said he couldn't even move the tombstone. The demon looked menacingly at the boy and told him what he had to do if he wanted to be. He was very frightened. Then the demon shouted menacingly at the boy to get out of here. The protagonist woke up on his bed. He was very scared after experiencing a terrible vision. He was already in the current reality, but he still continued to see the evil demon. After which the lad with a mute cry rose and sat down on the bed. He felt very ill. He was completely exhausted. He had a headache, and he still couldn't get out of bed. The protagonist looked at the camera. He wondered if this was what the old man had told him. Remembering the demon, he realized that until his power reached the threshold, he would not be able to move the slab. The protagonist thought about it and remembered that in the graveyard of rebirth, there are 100 tombstones, which means there must be 100 souls. Suddenly, the protagonist was distracted by a knock on the door by Sun's girlfriend, who shouted at him to get up. The girl happily informed the guy that she was waiting for him and that breakfast was ready. He said excitedly to the girl that he was on his way, still holding the stone in his hands. The protagonist was still thinking to himself. He remembered how he ended up in the graveyard of rebirth. The main character came into the kitchen for breakfast. The girl sat and looked at him silently. Intoga-san and cooked a very good and hearty breakfast for the guy. The guy cheerfully told his girlfriend she was taking such good care of him that he didn't even want to leave. The main character told the girl he'd do the dishes, cook, and warm the bed in the winter. The girl replied to the guy cheerfully that she doesn't need to warm her bed. She has a heated floor at home in the winter, and told the guy it was impossible for him to stay long. There is a monthly rent and a lot of household chores. He told the girl excitedly that he had no money at the moment. Sun thought to herself, "Does the guy want to live off her?" After some thought, the protagonist took a napkin out of the box. He wanted to draw something. The guy, very inspired and distractedly, started writing with a pencil on a napkin. The girl waited in surprise to see what the guy would write to her. The time passed very quickly. The protagonist handed the girl a napkin on which he had written the recipe for the elixir. He explained to his girlfriend that he had written a recipe for a rejuvenation remedy from Yandan. If this remedy is registered, rent won't be a problem for the guy. Sun told the guy that no company would be interested in his proposal. She asked if the protagonist knew what was in demand on the market. The guy asked if it was a cosmetic specialty of Huame Group. The protagonist told the girl to show the recipe to experts. The lowest cost of it will be 10 million. At that moment, the Sun girl's phone rang. It was Xia Zhokshui calling her. The girl got very excited when she saw that the principal had just called her. The protagonist was very excited about the girl's phone call and heard a message from the director about a meeting. She said she's leaving right now. The girl told the guy that she was leaving now and he could somehow brag about it later. She also advised that the protagonist find a job. The main character went outside and was surprised to think to himself that he had not realized that Chinese traditional medicine was no longer in the forefront, sitting on one of the city streets informing passers-by that miraculous hands are a very good remedy. The guy put a sign by the bench and said the first customer would get a 20% discount. The main character tells people that his remedy cures all diseases. A consultation costs 100,000 yuan. He said cheerfully to all the customers not to skimp on their health. People were surprised by such a price. Someone even said that the main character is a psycho or a charlatan. Someone even suggested calling the police. The protagonist thought to himself that he'd better go look for buyers elsewhere. Suddenly, the protagonist heard someone coming from the side and asked for everyone to move aside. A red-haired girl with pink eyes came up. She cheerfully told the main character to hurry up and follow her. After a while, the protagonist, along with his new acquaintance, arrived at a large house. The girl excitedly told the guy that this was her house. He replied surprised that the house was very big. The guy took off his glasses and told the girl confidently that his cure would cure all diseases. The girl waved her hand and told the guy that he misunderstood her. She didn't bring him for that at all. The girl said her name was Shen Mingjia. She added that she was impressed by the guy's courage in trying to outwit everyone. He reiterated that he was not a charlatan. The main character told the girl that he had no time for games and wanted to leave. Shen said that she would transfer 100,000 yuan to the guy's card. The guy got very excited and surprised. His mood immediately improved. He told the girl that he was at her complete disposal and would do anything for her. Shen very sadly told the guy that her father was very sick. The doctor said the father had a couple days to live. The girl's parents had always lived close to each other. Shen told the guy that he should pretend to be a demigod and take her father to the mountains for treatment before he died. That would make it easier for the girl's mom to get over the loss. The protagonist thought to himself that the Shen girl wasn't particularly smart. The guy thought to himself and decided that he would fulfill the girl's request. Chen told the girl that he would do her assignment and she could trust him. Shen replied that she was relying on the guy. The girl replied cheerfully to the guy that if he didn't agree, she would call the police. Shen, together with the boy, approached the entrance of the house. The door was opened by a woman and she greeted the young girl. The woman asked the girl confidently if this was a good time for guests. Shen said that the main character had come to help. Shen reminded the guy not to forget their agreement. He confirmed that he remembered. The girl and the protagonist went into the bedroom and there was a man lying on the bed. Shen turned to her father and told him she was back. The boy looked at the sick man and realized that things were bad. The protagonist looked at the lying man with a piercing and long studying gaze. The guy realized that the man lying on the bed was about to pass away and the doctors couldn't do anything to help him. He felt that the dead air had already filled the man's chest, and when it reached his head, there was nothing to save him. The girl said that a month ago his father was diagnosed with lung cancer, and they treated him abroad, but it had no effect. Yesterday, Dr. Chu Shen came and said that his father could only live for 1 day. Shen took the guy's hand and asked him to help her say all this from her mom. She added that she would pay as much as she needed. The girl's mom came in with the doctor. She was surprised that her daughter had already arrived. The mother said that Dr. Chu Shen said that daddy had 1 day to live. She asked her daughter if it was true. The Shen girl remembered that she and the doctor had agreed that he wouldn't say anything to his mom. Suddenly, a young guy came into the room and told the girl that this is the way life is, and there is no point in cheating on her mom. The guy's name was Shen Menglong. He said happily that he had already arranged everything, and the funeral would be held in a beautiful place. The girl turned to the guy and called him brother and said angrily, "How can he say that? Because mom is already feeling bad." The Shen guy said he was being honest. The boy replied reasonably that his father had already suffered enough, and that death would be a relief for him, and he could not bear to see him suffer any longer as a son. The boy told his mother that when he became the head of the family, he would treat her and his sister well. The mother sadly told her daughter that if her daddy left, she would leave with him. The protagonist realized that if the mother dies after the father, the inheritance will be divided between the son and daughter. The girl shouted threateningly to her brother that he would not be the head of the family. Father would not allow such a thing. The brother angrily shouted to the girl that their mother wanted to go to the other side. Brother Shen ran up and prepared to hit the girl. He threatened to tear her mouth apart. The protagonist got mad at the guy and hit him with all his might, causing Shen to fall to the floor. He shouted menacingly to the guy that his father wasn't dead yet and he had already planned the whole thing. The surrounding people were very much frightened by the mother worried about the fate of her son. The doctor menacingly told the protagonist that he had just punched the future head of the Shen family. Suddenly he raised his finger and named the number 10 million. The people around him were surprised. The protagonist said confidently that he would cure the father of the family for a sum of money. In the hallway, the Shen family was discussing a sequel from the protagonist. The mother asked her daughter if the main character could really help her father. The girl said that she had known her father for a long time, Shen told her mother confidently that the boy would be able to cure her father with his medical skills. She thought to herself that the quack had overcharged 10 million yuan. Shen's boyfriend told his sister that they are now inviting scammers to divide the inheritance. He asked the girl if she really thought he would help them. The brother told his sister that if their father died, she would be fully responsible and would receive nothing from the inheritance. The boy thought to himself that the father would die anyway, and he would get the whole inheritance. The protagonist went to the bed where the dying man lay. He was there himself. When he activated his skills, he told the man that if he met him, he would definitely not give him a chance to die. The guy said his medical knowledge from the old man was enough to get the man out of the Phantom Gate. The guy commanded heaven and earth demons and spirits, yin and devil, to turn to the light. He shouted for the man to get up. A magic circle began to revolve around the sick man's body. The guy once again sternly commanded the sick man to get up. Then his black aura started coming out of the sick man's mouth. While in the magic circle, the man's body continued to convulse. I thought the man was now enveloped in dead qi. The meridians are also blocked. As a result, the man's death is inevitable. The guy held out his hand to try another spell to save the man. I thought the patient still had a pulse, so it's not a total loss. A blue demon was flying around the sick man. He thought the pulse in the patient's body was yang. He commanded the man to get up. Then the demon flew away from the man. He thought it was the dead qi that had escaped. The protagonist put his hand out to catch the demon. He shouted that he had caught it. He was able to hold the demon in his fist. It was supposed to help heal the patient. When the demon came out of the man, it even lifted him off the bed. At the end of the healing procedure, the sick man collapsed unconscious on the bed. The protagonist thought to himself that killing a man was easier than saving him. He didn't realize it would take so much effort. After the healing procedure, he came out of his father's bedroom. He told those present that the man was awake. Shen told the boy that he could take the money. The mother was very much surprised and asked the boy if the man was about to wake up. He confirmed that he had cured the patient and reminded the woman to give him the money. The mother told the boy that the card password had 6 zeros. At the same time, the Shen guy intervened. He snatched the card from the mother's hands. The son yelled at the mother to wake up. He reminded her that the father had advanced cancer and couldn't be cured. The protagonist reminded the guy that it wasn't easy for him to get the 10 million. Shen said he had to see the result first. The protagonist grabbed the guy's hand and squeezed it. Shen didn't realize that Shen was doing this. The protagonist said he earned the money as for counseling. He added that the man would wake up but only for 3 days. He took the card and said he was taking the money for himself. Shen's family members could visit him in 3 days. The protagonist reminded that if the family didn't show up, the man's death would be absolutely certain. The Shen guy said angrily that the protagonist beat him up and took his money. He threatened to call the police. The doctor said he had people in his department who would take care of it. Suddenly, the Shen girl heard something from outside. The bedroom door opened. Everyone here was very surprised to see my father leave the room. The son couldn't believe his eyes. He thought he was seeing a ghost. He could not believe that his father had been cured of his terminal cancer. The man excitedly asked where the doctor who had cured him had gone. The father told his daughter that he was grateful to her for bringing the doctor in, and he felt much better. The man turned and told his son that he had done a lot of good things lately. The Shen boy said they were one family. Then the father shouted to his son that he had seen exactly what he was doing. He added that today, the Shen fellow would not get a single yuan from him. The son asked his father not to do that. The man menacingly and sternly asked his son to find the doctor who cured him. At the same time, a meeting with many participants was taking place in the corporation building. Someone said that the company's shares have fallen sharply, and they are in a difficult situation. Another participant said that the forecast will not change in the next couple of days. One participant reported that their competitors have come out with some amazing oral products. Sun Girl sat and listened attentively to what was being talked about in the meeting. The girl thought about it. She wanted to find a solution to what to do with all this. The girl sun and sat in the meeting and was bored. She was not interested in what the people around her were saying. Suddenly, something distracted Sun Yi's attention. It was as if she had sensed something. The girl thought to herself that she felt as if her breasts were itching, and slipped her hand discreetly under her clothes and found a piece of paper. Sun and noticed that she found a note from the main character. She couldn't figure out how it got there. The girl couldn't figure out when the protagonist had just managed to slip her a note. It was a recipe for an elixir. Sun read the recipe with great interest. She couldn't understand how it could be worth 10 million. At that time, someone approached her from the side. The young woman quickly snatched the recipe she was reading out of the girl's hands. The woman said cheerfully that she would see what the girl was hiding in her place. Asuna and excitedly turned to the woman and gave her name as Suna. The woman asked with interest what the recipe for the elixir was. The girl demanded strictly that Suna return the note to her. The woman also asked the girl snidely if she had received the note and now kept it as a treasure. Suna asked with interest to the girl, wondering if the girl was able to get the prescription after bedtime, and told the woman Suna not to think that everyone sells their body like her. The woman told the girl that she was going to get rid of this garbage. Immediately afterwards, Suna began tearing the recipe note to shreds. The girl watched in surprise and chagrin as Suna tore apart the recipe for the elixir. Sun and looked angrily at the woman from excitement. She didn't even know what to say. Girl Sun and shouted angrily to the woman not to take on too much, and struck Suna and shouted to her that though she had torn the scrap of paper, it belonged to her. In the end, the meeting participants were surprised by the conflict between the girls, and shouted threateningly to Suna that she had no right to tear up her paper. At the same time, she grabbed her by the hair. Then the girl shouted angrily to the woman that she was going to kill her. The participants of the meeting looked at the conflict between the women with astonishment. At this time, the door of the meeting hall of Suna and Suna quietly opened and continued the fight. A woman entered quietly. She noticed the conflict in the office and approached Suna and the Suna girl. The woman who entered was the president of a company named Sia Jokshui. She asked if the meeting participants had nothing else to do. The headmistress looked menacingly at her subordinates. The participants greeted her timidly. Then Sia Jokshui came to the table. She said that those present should know what they were here for. A woman reported that their competitors were able to perfect mouthwash. However, their corporation's products have been at the same level for several years. The participants of the meeting started talking excitedly among themselves. Suddenly, the headmistress banged her hand on the table with all her might. She wanted everyone to be quiet. The director said that the company's cosmetics had not changed for 3 years. She asked how long the research and development department would stay in place. The employee replied that they work enough, but the competition in the beauty industry is very big. They have studied all possible formulas and can't find a better substitute yet. The director was listening. The employee said that his department had researched all possible formulas. Even if they searched through the ancient books, they wouldn't be able to find the right formula. The headmistress looked sternly at her subordinate and said that she already knew that. Shia remembered that it took them 5 years to build the biggest cosmetics company in Jiangcheng City. She can't just give up. Suddenly, Suna asked the audience if they all cared about the beauty formula. Suna told the meeting attendees that the girl Suna and had a very interesting recipe from Yandan. The employee was very surprised. He thought that the recipe from Zhu Yandan had been lost. An employee told the director that if they get the prescription from Sun and their company will be saved. The headmistress asked with interest from the girl Sun and whether it was true that she had the recipe. The girl Sun and stood up and said that the note was written by an acquaintance of hers. The headmistress sternly and excitedly asked the girl to show her the recipe. The girl pulled out scraps of paper and placed them on the table in front of those present. Afterward, the girl told the principal that her friend was just trying to make a joke. People present could believe that a priceless formula could be written on an ordinary napkin. Suna thought angrily to herself that Suna's girlfriend was taking the headmistress for a fool. At the same time, an employee jumped up and examined a piece of paper. The man examined and analyzed the recipe he was very much interested in. And then the employee verified that the prescription on the piece of paper was true. A meeting was going on in the corporation building, and one of the employees was expressing his opinion. The employee emotionally said that he himself had seen Suna tear up a piece of paper with a formula that their company depended on. The woman tried to justify herself. The man was very angry. The headmistress said that she was dismissing Suna from her position and she had to leave the conference room immediately. The director added that if the prescription could not be restored, she would prosecute the woman. The woman tried to justify herself, saying that she did not know. Suna told everyone here that she didn't tear the paper on purpose. The employee said cheerfully that their company's very first formula was developed from this recipe. The employee said they couldn't get the full prescription before. If they can get it back now, they can definitely make a breakthrough. The principal told the employee not to say anything else. She told the other employees to all help put the pieces of formula together. Suna was very surprised. She couldn't believe how Suna could have the right recipe. At the same time, the headmistress once again called Suna by name. The woman responded. The director said that the formula they received was their salvation. But in her foolishness, Suna tore the recipe to pieces. The director finally told Suna that she was free to go shopping. Late at night, the Sun girl went home to her apartment. The girl went into the apartment and yelled to the main character that she was back. After silence, the girl decided that the guy had left. Sun thought to herself in surprise that she could not have guessed that the recipe from Ichen would be true. The girl sat down on the couch and thought. She wondered if the boy would come back to her. Soon remembered the main character and thought he was smitten with her. The girl remembered that the protagonist had written the recipe for her with great carelessness and thought the guy was very suspicious. He was a complete stranger to her, even though he had spent the night at her house. The girl thought that if she reveals the identity of the main character, then maybe he will do something to her. She even thought that he is the Lord of the world. Suddenly, the main character came up behind the girl and put his hand on her head. Sun and shook with fear. Ichan asked the girl how she was doing. He reminded her that she had called him. The girl asked the boy in surprise when he had come back. He replied that he had just come back when he heard the call from the girl. The girl and the main character were sitting and drinking tea at the table. Sun and could not address the guy in any way. He asked the girl, wondering why she was getting excited now. The girl said she wanted to apologize to the guy. She reminded him about the recipe he gave her earlier. The protagonist replied that his last time was just a note. He said he could write to the girl again. He yawned and told the girl that he was tired today and would go to bed. He proceeded to tell her to go to bed early too. Sun and yelled that she wasn't done yet. The main character told the girl he was tired as a dog. He promised that he would help the girl if she asked him as a man. Sun and got shy and told the guy it was all too much. She reminded him that she could call the police. The girl reminded the boy that he wanted to meet Mrs. Xia Qianshui. She added that the headmistress also wanted to see him. The guy grudgingly said he couldn't see me yet because he was busy. Sun reminded him that he had even argued with the security department to talk to the headmistress. The protagonist questioned whether he really needed to go to the headmistress. A guy told a girl that she ignored his love yesterday, so he's going to be a hussy today. The girl told the guy that she could make an appointment for him in advance. Ichenu liked the girl's proposal. Sun and said goodbye to the guy until tomorrow. The protagonist said he wants Mrs. Xia to contact him. He's not in the mood to go to her. The guy closed the door behind him and said he was going to bed and they could talk to the girl tomorrow. While the girl's phone rang, it was the headmistress calling her. The principal was in her home at the time. She asked the girl's son and what the main character told her. The director listened to the answer and asked again if she needed to contact Chen. Headmistress Xia replied to the girl that she would think about it. She also demanded that Sun and look out for the title character. The headmistress sat down and thought about it. She was very interested in the behavior of the main character. I remembered that the guy made a scene at the front desk earlier, and now he won't go to the front desk. The headmistress thought that the main character was a very unusual young man. The next day, the protagonist went out for a walk in the city and the sun was shining in the sky. Soon he came to a building called the Temple of Humanity. The guy stood and looked at the building and said thoughtfully that this was the pharmacy. The main character went into the pharmacy building and there were a lot of people inside. He thought that this pharmacy was the biggest in the neighborhood. There was a big queue inside, and the boy decided to have a look around. The protagonist was looking around the interior of the pharmacy. He was very interested. Suddenly something really caught the guy's attention and he went to the wall. I saw a painting of a huge demonic flying tiger. The painting seemed interesting. The guy said cheerfully that although the painting was a fake, it wasn't bad at all. A girl and a man approached the protagonist from behind. The girl called him a bug and asked him where he came from. The man's name was Zhu Renge. The girl's name was Zhu Jishuan. She said that the protagonist had just called their family's treasure a fake. The man turned to the girl and told her not to be rude. Jixuan called the man grandpa and added that the main character called their painting a fake. The grandfather said that the painting's authenticity had been confirmed by several collectors. He asked the guy why he thought it was a fake. Chen said that grandfather's words prove his uneducated and uneducated collectors, grandfather and granddaughter, got angry. The protagonist told the interlocutors that the copy of the painting was very good and they could continue to deceive people in this way. Afterwards, the guy said he thought he'd find something interesting in this place, but it turned out not to be so. The girl got really pissed off and yelled at the protagonist for being an asshole. Then the girl told her grandfather that she wanted to teach the protagonist a lesson. The grandfather told Jixuan to take it easy because she was an ordinary person. The protagonist stopped. He looked at the girl with great attention and interest. Jixuan didn't stand still. She accelerated and prepared to attack the protagonist. The girl wanted to kick the guy. She yelled that she couldn't let him be so arrogant. Grandpa was surprised and worried. He remembered that you can't use ancient martial arts against mortals. The protagonist had absolutely no problem catching the girl's leg in flight. He held the girl's leg and asked if that was all she could do. The girl was surprised that the guy was able to grab her, because she had used the same technique to kick out 2 sandbags. The protagonist asked the Huan girl with great interest if she had calmed down. The girl shouted menacingly at the boy to stop tickling her and let go. He thought to himself that he was a bad boy. Suddenly, Jixuan felt that she could not hold on and began to fall. The girl plopped down on the floor. Grandfather called out to her very frightened and excitedly. He said that he did not expect to see an ancient warrior here, and added that martial arts are not for women. If the girl practiced for a couple more years, she might be able to do something. At which time the girl got up from the floor. She was very angry. The girl shouted menacingly to the guy that he had no right to tell her if he didn't like something he could get out. Grandpa fearfully told Jixuan to calm down. The main character was interested in watching what was happening. Grandpa looked very sternly at the protagonist and asked how he did it. The guy replied that he could easily block a punch without even bothering. The girl shouted that she didn't beat the guy only because of her grandfather's mercy. The girl yelled that the main character just pissed her off and it was all an accident. The protagonist listened with interest to the girl's answer and wanted to offer her another fight. The girl started to get scared. She noticed a powerful aura coming from the main character. He looked threateningly at the girl and her grandfather and proceeded to repeat them in full force. The girl fell to the floor in fear. She couldn't understand how it was possible for a guy to send out such key energy. The girl was scared and yelled to her grandfather to run away because the main character is dangerous. The grandfather told the guy to forgive his granddaughter because she doesn't know Taishan. He replied that the girl is just a child. After that, Grandpa demanded that Jixuan immediately apologize to the guy. Grandpa asked the boy to tell him about the painting on the wall. He agreed because the old man seemed sincere. The protagonist held out his hand and began to activate his magic skills. The guy told his companions to watch. The grandfather and granddaughter looked on in amazement. After exposure to magic from the protagonist, a message from the artist from the year 2002 manifested on the painting. He said that the author of the painting tried for a large amount of money, but if you use the true energy of Ki, everything becomes clear. The protagonist was in the pharmacy waiting for his medicine to be given to him. A girl came up with a package and told the guy she'd brought him his medicine. He thanked the girl for personally giving him his medicine and called her Miss Ju. The girl said she was honored to serve the protagonist. She said the medicine was not cheap and asked if the guy had enough money. The protagonist told the girl that she was not as simple as she looked, but he called her very charming. The girl got angry. She shouted angrily to the guy to stop talking nonsense and say thank you to her grandfather. The grandfather said angrily to the granddaughter Jixuan that she still cannot calm down. He added that her master will not be able to master the skills of the protagonist. The girl was surprised. The grandfather told the protagonist that he had spoiled his granddaughter and not to be angry with her. The girl could not believe that the protagonist was better than her master. The grandfather said it would take him a few days to collect all the drugs the guy ordered. He added that because of the inconvenience, the protagonist would get everything for free. He took out his card and said who he wanted to pay, and he specified that he had recently enriched himself. The guy told the girl he didn't want her to get the impression that he couldn't pay for himself. The main character turned around and started to walk away. He said he would be back in a couple of days, and the old man said goodbye. Then the grandfather told his granddaughter that the guy's name was Ye Chen, and he came from the Ye family. The girl asked with interest how the old man knew the name of the main character, at which time the old man thought to himself that the city would soon be troubled. He was walking along the streets of the city. The boy thought that it had been a long time since his parents had died. The protagonist decided to himself that it was time to begin preparations. The guy thought about it and realized he had another thing to do first. The protagonist needed to deal with a pesky stalker. The boy sighed to himself. He was really sick of the man who was always chasing him. At this time, the girl asked her grandfather what was so special about the main character since he had just figured out the painting. Grandpa turned around and told the girl that the main character wasn't just special, he was even superior to her master. The girl shouted that she didn't believe and no one could compare to her master. The old man told his granddaughter excitedly that once the boy arrived, a very big change would begin. The old man said there are rumors that the protagonist can kill entire armies with his bare hands. The girl asked with interest if the guy was too young to be the new master. The old man said he's much more powerful than any master. He is only 20 years old and already has many opponents around him. In the end, Grandpa said that they Ju family shouldn't be the protagonist's enemy. When the guy who was following the protagonist decided that Mr. Shen was looking for him, the guy thought to himself happily that if he didn't miss him, he could get the money right away. Suddenly, the stalker noticed the protagonist turn sideways into an alley. The stalker was very frightened and worried. He realized that the protagonist turned into the alley because he noticed him. Then the stalker looked into the alley and noticed that the protagonist was completely missing. He was very much surprised. The stalker was looking in all directions. He didn't understand where he had gone. At that time, the protagonist flew at his opponent from above. The protagonist grabbed the stalker's head and asked if he was looking for him now. He told the stalker not to make him kill him. The guy begged and said he would tell everything. The stalker said his name was Feng Tuan and he was a private detective. He told many facts from his biography. The protagonist yells to the private detective that he needs to know the name of his client. A private detective reported that Mr. Shen Haihua announced a reward of $1 million if the main character is found. He remembered that the Shen Haihua man would die in 3 days if he didn't continue the treatment. After which the private investigator offered to let the guy follow him. He offered to split the fee in half. The protagonist approached the detective and decided to send a message to Shen Haihua through him. The main character said that if Shen Haihua wanted to live, he shouldn't do such things. The detective called out to the protagonist. He turned around and said grudgingly that he had more to do. The private detective had a request and said that Mr. Shen hired him because he couldn't figure out the main character's movements. The main character was with a girl named Sun and was in her apartment in a big house. The girl was tidying herself standing near the mirror. The guy asked her where she was going. Sun told the protagonist that they were going to go to the store and he needed a change of clothes. She also said that the guy needed a cell phone to keep in touch. He looked calmly at the girl and said he shouldn't be so generous. The girl told the guy not to worry about his budget and she'd pay for it. After that, the protagonist along with his girlfriend came to a large shopping mall to do some shopping. The girl was trying on various fashionable outfits and assessed how fashionable the guy looked. Sun said of the main character that he looks very handsome if he's well dressed. The girl told the guy very cheerfully that he's not ashamed to pick up college girls like that. I asked the guy if he had a girlfriend and if he needed someone to introduce him to. He said he didn't need a girlfriend and asked the guy if he had never fallen in love and was still a virgin. He said he spent 5 years honing his craft and didn't have time for girls. The guy remembered that when his parents were alive, he liked a girl from school named Chu Sharan. The main character wrote a letter to the schoolgirl because he couldn't control himself at the time. The girl even wrote him back. The girl said that she would date him if he confessed his love to her in front of all the teachers and students. He did so. He was very naive at the time, but the schoolgirl blew off the protagonist in front of everyone. It was a trap, and he fell for it like a fool. After that, the guy started exploring himself. The protagonist eventually realizes after the search that it's all a waste of time. The boy remembered that today, the Chu family was one of the top 4 families in Jiangcheng City. For this reason, Sun's words hit his pride. Sun told the guy that she wasn't in a relationship either, and her life was perfect. The main character happily reminded the girl that she wanted to buy him clothes, and suggested that the guy go to Armani. Although the clothes there are expensive, she has enough money. At that time, some people approached the boy and the girl. The woman said she hadn't seen Sun in a while and asked if she had a boyfriend. The protagonist looked at the woman with displeasure and thought it was a Churan 6. The woman said that Sun had not changed even after many years. The woman recalled that in high school, she had once gotten close to a scumbag named Yi Chen. The protagonist was very upset to hear the woman say this. She said that he looked a lot like a former acquaintance from high school. The woman looked at the protagonist and asked if his name was Loser Chen. The man asked the woman to tell more about the Loser Chung. The woman told a sad story of how the Loser Chen confessed his love for Chu Sharan in front of everyone. The woman laughingly recalled that after the incident, Feng was so embarrassed that he never showed up at school again. The woman said that something happened to the Yi family and that the boy himself was killed. The main character was really pissed off. He thought he was getting very noisy. The protagonist angrily shouted that he was going to shut the woman's mouth and prepared to attack her, at which time the Sun girl sensed something wrong. She went over and grabbed the guy's arm and told the guy to leave the woman alone so they could go shopping. A woman asked the protagonist and his girlfriend if they had the money to go to Armani. Then the woman turned to her companion and called him Ajun. She added that she also wanted a new piece of clothing. The man replied that he would definitely buy some. He told the girl that he could get rid of the man and woman who approached them. Sun and reminded the guy that he had only been at the station a couple of days ago. The girl and the guy went to the window and said that the main character could use a new costume. The saleswoman came over. She said that the suit was new and cost only $360,000, and remembered she only had $300,000 on her card. She told the main character that the color of the suit didn't suit him. A woman came up and said she was laughing because Sun and she didn't have the money to even make such a purchase. The girl replied excitedly that she didn't need to spend money on the suit since she didn't like the color. The woman reminded the girl that her brother didn't even finish high school because there was no money. The woman asked Sun if she wanted to hit her and reminded her that she was still friends with Chu Sharan. The woman asked why Sun and just stand there like that because she wanted to hit her. The protagonist got very angry and swung to hit the woman. He hit the woman with all his might and she fell to the floor immediately. The protagonist menacingly told the woman that she should shut her mouth forever. After a punch from the main character, the woman lay on the floor. Everyone else was very surprised. Sun looked fearfully at the lying woman. She was afraid that now something might happen to the protagonist. The man was amazed and annoyed and decided to film the whole event on his cell phone. The woman shouted threateningly to the protagonist that she was Chu Sharan's best friend. She also asked if she knew who her boyfriend was. The protagonist menacingly and calmly replied to the woman that he didn't care at all. The man said he was the CFO of a company with an annual salary of $5 million. Suddenly approached from the side of more people, man looked at everything that was happening and took a deep breath. The man called himself Shen Haihua and said he didn't expect to see this today. Mr. Shen turned to the man standing across from him and asked how he dared to threaten the protagonist using his company's name. The man was very frightened. He thought that the president of the company had long been terminally ill and didn't understand why Mr. Shen had come here. If he supported Mr. Jun now, the consequences would be terrible. The woman turned to Mr. Shen and said that his family often thought of him, and Jun asked Mr. Shen what business he had come for. and Jun was surprised that Mr. Shen paid absolutely no attention to him. At the same time, Mr. Shen approached the protagonist and shook his hand. He said he was glad he found him. Mr. Shen told the guy that if it wasn't for his help, he'd be dead already. The woman was very much surprised. She couldn't understand why Mr. Shen was so prostrate in front of the protagonist, Sun Girl, and was surprised that the guy hadn't been in the city long and was already familiar with people of Mr. Shen's level. He told the man that he gave him a chance to live, and his family didn't value it. The man said he was sorry his son hurt the protagonist. He taught him a lesson, and now the guy wants to make amends. The man sternly told his son to get on his knees in front of the protagonist. After that, the guy very quickly and obediently fell to his knees. The surrounding people were surprised. The guy told the protagonist he was truly sorry for what he did and asked for forgiveness. The man was very surprised. He had known the guy for a long time, and he was very proud. Now he kneeled down himself. And Jun couldn't understand where the main character came from. He thought the guy was from Jeongnan province or some powerful family. At the same time, the main character called out the name of a girl named Sun, and she was very enthusiastic about what was happening. The guy told the girl calmly to go to the clothing store and buy her something. Mana Jun was very surprised because of the protagonist ignoring Mr. Shen, and Jun thought to himself with astonishment that it was the first time he had seen Mr. Shen being treated like this. At the same moment, the father came up to his son and threateningly asked him who had done what he had done. Mr. Shen shouted threateningly to his son that if he was not forgiven by the protagonist, he would spend his life on his knees. At that time, Ajun came up to Mr. Sheng and said that he had made a slight mistake. The father slapped Ajun and shouted threateningly that he was the one in the wrong. He insulted the protagonist on behalf of the company. He added that as of today, Ajun no longer worked for the company. At the same time, Mr. Shen thought to himself that his life did not depend on himself and reassured himself that he would not die. The woman came up to Ajun and said that they had crossed the wrong person. The man thought sadly to himself that now he had nothing. The girl said with surprise to the guy that he couldn't pay the rent, but could buy her clothes. Son and carried many shopping bags with fancy clothes in them. The girl said happily to the protagonist that she was very touched. The guy was silent in response. He thought the girl wanted him without choosing anything else. He thought it was clear that he had millions on his hands. At the same time, suddenly someone from outside called out to the protagonist. He stopped with the girl. Mr. Shen appeared. He asked the girl to stop as well. Mr. Shen asked the girl if she wanted to go for a walk, and his subordinate stood next to him with large boxes. The protagonist asked incredulously to the man what he wanted. Mr. Shen said he didn't want the main character, but the girl next to him. Afterwards, the man told the girl that she had been mistreated by his company's employees. He asked her to accept these modest gifts. Sun, and remembered to herself that she wanted to buy these things, but they were expensive for her. The protagonist thought to himself that Mr. Shen wanted him to like him, so he decided to enter from the girl's side. After that, the protagonist turned to the man. Mr. Shen immediately replied. He told the man he was giving him one last chance. He's coming to the man's house tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Mr. Shen thanked the protagonist and reminded him that if he needed help, the Shen family company would always help him. In an unknown posh mansion, there was a meeting between a girl Shuran and a woman she knew. A woman was very excited and emotional, telling her friend Shuran that she had seen the main character. The woman specified that the main character changed his character, but his appearance remained the same. Shuran's girlfriend said about the guy coming back. She was watering her flowers at the time. Shuran said she knows Mr. Shen. He is very experienced and good-looking. Shuran said that if Mr. Shen was groveling to the protagonist, then the guy must have great status or power. Shuran thought to herself that even if the protagonist had survived, he would have become a bum. She couldn't understand how it was that Mr. Shen could talk so much in front of her. The woman asked with interest if the guy they saw was really the same guy. Shuran told with interest that 5 years ago the Yi family was under her Chu family. Shuran then cheerfully said that even now, after 5 years, the protagonist can't equal her. At this time in the apartment complex, the protagonist was with his girlfriend in her apartment. Girl's son and scrutinized the vast array of gifts she had received. The girl asked the protagonist to tell how he met Mr. Shen. She added that she could only dream of such brands. The protagonist looked at the girl and answered her calmly that the important thing was that she was happy. Son and asked the guy cheerfully if he was going to meet the headmistress Xia Josue. The girl asked the protagonist if he could restrain himself in front of the divine coloring of the headmistress. The guy told the girl that he would watch TV for the time being. On the TV news this morning, 2 male bodies were found in a mansion in the city. It was confirmed that Chen Zhengguo, who was the president of the city's Chamber of Commerce, was killed. The second victim was the son of a man named Chen Feng, Sun Girl, and said surprised that she wanted to take revenge on father and son Chung, but she didn't think it would happen like this. The protagonist judiciously said that bad people making enemies' death is commonplace. The guy told his girlfriend that he's flawless at killing people and climbing ledges. The girl told the guy what she would do if she got arrested. She thought to herself that she could fight well, but she couldn't kill anyone. Then Sun told the main character that she went to check out the clothes she bought, and not to peek. The protagonist looked at the girl without any emotion. He thought that nobody believes in anything these days. He remembered that he had bought all the medicines at the Chinese medicine pharmacy today he would need to practice in the evening. Suddenly the guy stopped and met a suspicious-looking girl in front of him. A girl came up and said hello to the main character. The guy didn't know her. The girl looked closely at the guy and said that they had finally met them. I recognized this girl as the police officer who questioned him. The main character walked past the girl and told her he was busy right now. The woman asked the guy who was leaving if he'd heard what happened to the Chen family. The woman said that the reason for the incident was a curse from the Yi family. The boy looked at the woman worriedly. The woman looked at the protagonist and said judiciously that she didn't believe it was him. The woman said calmly that the family had gone into oblivion, while the protagonist reached out to her. He asked the woman angrily what she was implying and held her by the neck with his hand. The woman thought that although she had practiced martial arts, she was no match for the protagonist. She said out loud that she wanted to discuss some things with the guy. He let the woman go and said he was meeting someone else. The woman looked at the boy after him. She thought that he had already been able to achieve perfection in ancient martial arts at a young age. The woman thought it was impossible for a guy to reach that level in 5 years. The woman looked at the guy leaving and wondered to herself what he had been through for these 5 years. After returning home, the protagonist was busy preparing his potions in the kitchen. He put the drugs he bought at the drugstore into different pots. The guy thought to himself that while the girl was asleep, he could borrow the microwave for alchemy. At the same time, the guy noticed smoke coming out of the microwave and decided to himself that the old man had sold him junk. The protagonist pulled a single magic pill from the smoking pile. The protagonist saw that he was only able to create 5 magic pills. The guy clutched the pills in his fist and decided that they would be more than enough for Shen Haiwa, Sun Girl, and woke up at her home in a large apartment complex the next morning. Barely awake, the girl came out of her room to wake up the protagonist and saw that the guy was already awake, dressed and standing by the door, wanting to go somewhere. The girl asked with very great interest to the guy where he was going so early. The main character turned to the girl and said he was going for a checkup and she could call if she needed anything. Then he left the apartment and slammed the door. The girl was left alone with her thoughts. Sun thought she wouldn't call the guy a doctor. All day long he just talked nonsense. The girl remembered that he knew the right prescription, so he had medical knowledge. The girl sat down on the couch and thought about it. She remembered how much time had passed since the death of the Yi family. After much thought, she could not understand why such a good family was in trouble. The girl remembered with sadness that Uncle A was very kind. She also remembered that the main character was decent. There was a Shen girl standing outside a large building next to an expensive car. The girl was standing next to the car and various passers-by were looking at her from the side. Passing guys and men looked at the girl with great attention and they didn't understand who she was waiting for. 2 passers-by were talking to each other. They couldn't figure out whether the Shen girl was waiting for a boyfriend or a girlfriend. A passerby said that a rich woman can't give a man she can only drive a cool car with a bodyguard. The protagonist came up and told the passers-by that their thoughts were not correct. The passers-by were surprised. He told the guys that the girl in front of them was definitely not waiting for them. Passing guys started talking about themselves that they were really good. After that, the guys turned to the main character and asked him to tell them who he was. He said he really doesn't understand women. Then the protagonist winked at the guy standing there and said confidently that the girl was waiting for him. The surrounding guys didn't believe the words they didn't hear from the protagonist. One of them said that a beautiful girl with an expensive car could not wait for him. At this time, the Shen girl noticed the protagonist and immediately called out his name. The boys were talking to each other in surprise and thought at first that the girl had called out to them. The Shen girl ran happily to the main character. She said she was already waiting for him. The guys on the street couldn't believe that a girl was coming onto the main character. The Shen girl shook hands with the main character and said happily that he had finally come. Chen said that he had been a little delayed. The girl asked the protagonist if his friends were around him. The guy replied that the passers-by introduced themselves as the god of love and a prince. The girl told the guy to be careful because there's been a lot of strange characters in the neighborhood lately. The guys on the street were surprised by the whole thing. One of them said he felt like a fool. Very soon the protagonist together with the girl arrived at the luxurious house of the Shen family. The protagonist along with the members of the Shen family gathered in a huge hall. Mr. Shen looked at the pills the protagonist had given him with surprise. The man asked the guy if he could definitely eat the pills. He asked if it was possible to use acupuncture or some kind of decoction instead. The protagonist told the man to eat the pills. The mother of the family said that their expensive Shen would definitely hold up. Then the protagonist told the man to take 5 pills at once. Mr. Shen agreed. Without any hesitation, Mr. Shen immediately threw himself 5 pills at once. Immediately after taking the medication, the man felt a tremendous and powerful effect from it. Mr. Shen felt a very strong energy throughout his body, and his wife became agitated. The man felt as if a rich medicinal fragrance was blossoming throughout his body, and some kind of power was enveloping him in a warm flow. Mr. Shen shouted cheerfully that his feelings now were stronger even than the very desire for life itself. The wife told her husband not to talk nonsense. After the procedure, Mr. Shen shook the guy's hand and said he would be grateful to him for the rest of his life. Then the man handed the protagonist a card and said it had $100 million on it. He took the card and said in response that it was a transaction, and you don't have to thank him for it. A man told the protagonist that he had a vacant property near a large apartment complex. Mr. Shen then gave the protagonist a card and asked him to accept it. He added that he hoped they would have a chance to have dinner together. He took the card and thought that the house would be a good place for him to store his medicinal materials. The guy thought to himself that if Mr. Shen was a businessman, he must know business intelligence. The protagonist remembered the Tianjin Group company that her father had founded. It was his life's work until tragedy struck. The protagonist wanted to find the company but was unsuccessful, so he thought that Mr. Shen could still be of use to him. The protagonist told the man that he was accepting his gift. He offered to have dinner with him tomorrow night. The man replied that he would be honored to be a guest at his dinner and that he would definitely come. He said goodbye, turned around, and started to leave. The protagonist returned to the pharmacy building. He needed to talk to the old man urgently. The guy walked over to the big bags that were fully stocked with various potions. An old man saw him standing by the sacks from a distance and called his name. The old man informed the protagonist that these medicinal materials had just arrived. They were very fresh and had excellent properties. The protagonist told the salesman that no matter how fresh the materials are, they're still better. The old man told the guy that he didn't want to just accept the materials, so he offered to set the cost price at $5 million. He thought that now it is very unprofitable to set the cost price in the markets of Chinese medicine materials cost really more than $10 million. The boy thought to himself that the old man was a good man, and it was not good to be in his debt. He asked the old man where his granddaughter had gone. The old man said that the Jixuan girl would be back later as she had gone to the mountains with the master. He offered to make tea for the protagonist. Then the guy handed the old man a piece of white paper with some writing on it. The guy told the old man to give the girl a piece of paper when his granddaughter came back. If she doesn't understand, she has to give the piece of paper to the master. The old man promised the boy that he would be sure to pass it on. He looked carefully at the sheet to read exactly what was written on it. Then the protagonist asked the old man where alchemical furnaces are sold in Jiangcheng City. He thought sadly to himself that it would be impossible for him to work with an induction stove. After a short pause, the old man asked the boy with great excitement and surprise how he knew about alchemy. The old man said that legend has it that Chinese alchemists disappeared 1,000 years ago. There may be a few pills on the market, but they are a couple thousand years old and can cost millions of dollars. In reality, there were not many alchemists in ancient China. A family that had an alchemist could become one of the leading families in less than 3 years. The old man thought to himself, does the protagonist buy a lot of alchemy materials? He said he knew nothing about alchemy and was just interested in alchemical furnaces. The old man told the boy that he could join their auction, which would start 5 days later. The old man's words interested the protagonist very much, and he decided that he should go to the auction. In farewell, he told the old man not to forget to contact him, and all his materials should be delivered to a large apartment complex. A girl and her foreman came into the drugstore and shouted to Grandpa that they were back. Grandpa asked his granddaughter sternly if she had obeyed the master today. The girl said excitedly to the old man how could he have thought of such a thing. The grandfather reminded his granddaughter that she had offended the main character last time. He asked her to stay in the morning, but she ran away. The girl said that her master was much better than the protagonist. The master calmly told the girl not to talk nonsense. He said that he was an extraordinary person. The old man told the girl that the protagonist had asked her to give her something. He handed her a piece of paper. The girl looked at the sheet and said she couldn't make anything out. Then the girl tossed the note aside and said she couldn't read it because of her bad handwriting. Thereupon the master took the note in his hands and began to study it with great attention. Looking carefully at the note, master could not believe that this note was written for Jixuan. The foreman realized that the note was written by a professional. The handwriting was definitely the hand of a professional. The suddenly excited master turned to the old man and called him Lao Ju. The master asked the old man to introduce him to the main character. He really wanted to talk to him. The old man called the master Lao Qin and asked him what was wrong. People around asked the master what the note already said. He told them they wouldn't understand. The master said that he and his girlfriend practiced the 7 Yang technique. He learned about it by accident when he was young. Then the wizard's skills improved tremendously to astronomical proportions. The master, after long sessions, noticed something had even affected his internal organs. The girl said that explains why she has a lot of post-workout discomfort. The master told the girl reassuringly that as long as she was under his supervision, nothing would happen to her. He also said that she didn't have such a rich cultivation base. The master said that if he continued to train, he would likely die of organ failure if he didn't destroy his base by then. The old man asked the master if he could help him in any way, and he remembered that Lao Qin was guarding the security of the Zhu family. If something happened to him, it would affect the family. The master said very confidently and calmly to the old man not to worry. The master told the old man that on the piece of paper he was holding would be their salvation from now on. Nothing would be as before. The master added that they had met a noble man. The girl was very much surprised by such words. She could not believe that the master called the main character noble. After that, the girl became even more interested in the identity of the protagonist. She couldn't understand who Feng was. The protagonist came to a villa in a large housing complex provided by Mr. Shen. The boy looked at the house with great surprise. He had no idea it would be so big. The main character went inside and was struck by the rich decoration and furnishings in the kitchen. He walked into the hall and looked around, and everything looked pretty good to him. After that, the guy walked down the corridors and looked at the interior of the walls. The main character decided to himself that the furniture in the house is good and does not need to be replaced. He thought to himself that it would be very lonely, and even too lonely for one person to live in this house. The main character thought to himself that it would be good to have a Sunni girl in the villa. He remembered her calling her father today, son, and told the protagonist that he had to go home for some errands so she wouldn't be coming back to the apartment tonight. The protagonist thought about it. He was very worried about his girlfriend. The protagonist remembered to himself that his house had once been much smaller than this, but his home had always had a harmonious and lively atmosphere. After much thought, he realized that now he was completely and utterly alone. The main character reminded himself sadly that tomorrow was his parents' anniversary. The boy gathered himself. He swore to himself once again that he would avenge his parents. He thought to himself that he was able to crawl out of the abyss to blow that man's head off with his own hands and send him to his grave. The doorbell suddenly rang, and the boy was distracted from his unfortunate thoughts. The protagonist realized it was just in time for his medication to arrive, which he bought at the pharmacy. When he went outside, he saw workers unloading huge bags of medicine from a car. The main character happily thought to himself that he would be able to place all the materials in this building without any problems at that time someone called him. The protagonist looked away, wondering who had come to him now. An old man and his granddaughter came up and told the protagonist that he had brought the medicine, and as soon as he needed anything else, he could let him know. The guy replied that he didn't need anything else. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed a suspicious man next to his grandfather. He saw the master. He immediately realized that the ancient warrior was standing in front of him, and the master greeted him. Afterward, the main character had a lot of fun thanking people for their hard work. He told the guests hospitably that they could come to his house now. The protagonist looked at the master and asked him with interest who he was. Suddenly, the master immediately dropped to his knees in front of the protagonist. The master gave his name as Qin Yuanming and said that he thanked the protagonist for saving his life. The girl was very much surprised. She could not believe that the master really fell to his knees. The master told the protagonist that thanks to his method, he was able to avoid a dangerous situation. From now on, he would be his benefactor. The protagonist told the foreman excitedly that there was a very important point he was interested in. The protagonist asked the master why he called him Grand Master. The master reflected he could believe that the protagonist was even more powerful. He remembered that the division of positions are basic knowledge. He said, as if nothing had happened, that he had only recently come down from the mountains and therefore did not quite know the classification. The master said that if the protagonist in the mountains was not up to speed, he could explain everything to him. In the martial arts system, there are 4 levels besides external strength and internal strength. There is also master and master transformation. Each of the martial arts skill levels has its own distinct 3 stages. The master told the protagonist that he was now a master of transformation and was being equaled by many other martial artists. He thought to himself that such a division was an understandable exercise that he practiced much higher than the others. There are different realms. One of them serves to temper the body, another for enlightenment of the movement of separation and the spiritual path. There are 9 levels in each realm. After the realm of the spiritual path, there are even more terrifying ones. But now the protagonist can't reach them. He has not yet learned the realm of enlightenment. The protagonist asked the master with interest if there were many other masters. The master replied that he didn't know the exact number of other masters, but it is certain that most of them are related to the Huaxia family. The old man said there were 4 main families in Jiangcheng City. The weakest was the Chen family, which died a couple of days ago, and now the Wang family has replaced them. The protagonist remembered that Zheng Guo's boyfriend threatened him with his grandfather before he died. The boy thought that among the other families, the Churan was the one who impressed him the most. The protagonist happily thought to herself that now the Churin would realize that she was unworthy of existence. The master looked at the main character and saw that he had a very terrifying aura. The master thought fearfully to himself how much blood the protagonist must have on his hands. What struck the master most was that the protagonist had reached such a level at his young age. The main character was walking down the street around a lot of people the guy could not get through to the girl's son. And he strolled along the streets of the evening city and scrutinized the people around him. The protagonist thought something might have happened at home. He decided that if he couldn't contact her tomorrow, he would have to look for her. The guy felt hungry and decided he had to find a food stand. Suddenly, something caught the protagonist's attention. He saw the establishment in front of him. The guy realized he was looking at the diner of his buddy Van Yuhan, who they used to be friends with in high school. Chen Yu used to find this kind of food very tasty, so they often ate at the same place where he met Van Yu Chung. The protagonist remembered that even when he was deeply depressed, his friend was always there for him. When he went inside, he was very surprised that there was no one there at all. The guy asked Uncle Van to bring him a specialty kebab and a bottle of something. An elderly woman came into the room and politely apologized to the customer. The woman told the guy that they were closing the stall today and he could go eat somewhere else. The guy recognized Aunt Zhang standing in front of him. The woman said they were moving today. The guy could come to the opening of their new diner. The main character was surprised that the diner wanted to change locations after more than a decade. The protagonist looked at the woman and something stirred and caught his attention. The guy saw the abrasion on the woman's face. He couldn't figure out who did it. A man came into the room and told the woman not to send the guests away. Then the man placed the dish he ordered on the table in front of the protagonist. The man told the customer that if he was their last visitor, he was at his disposal. He noticed that Uncle Wang was also beaten up. He decided to himself that there could be no violence in their family. The man told the guy that after he ate he could leave and they wouldn't charge him. The main character picked up a chopstick from the dish. For him, it was the taste of his childhood. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed someone enter the diner and pushed a chair aside. The protagonist at this time prepared to consume the food he was holding. Then the protagonist got distracted and looked over and saw someone smashing furniture, broken furniture flying all over the diner. The protagonist jumped up from his seat and decided to protect the diner owners. A group of bandits came in and looked at the protagonist, and one of them said that the protagonist is not a bad guy. The protagonist was silent and looked very carefully at the bandits who had come in. The gang leader said he didn't want the protagonist today. He wanted the guy to hurry up and get out. The owners of the place were very frightened and called the leader of the gang by the name of Tiger. The Tiger told Mr. Wang that if he didn't pay them for security, what would his visitors think of him? After that, the Tiger went to the owner of the diner and told him that he no longer needed the store. Mr. Van asked to be left alone. The man once again menacingly told them to leave them alone as it was only their small business. Then the Tiger menacingly told the shopkeeper that he already knew everything in detail. The Tiger said menacingly to Mr. Vanya that he knew exactly where he wanted to move to. The gang leader said if he didn't get 50,000 yuan tomorrow, he'd tear up the new store. The Tiger told the shopkeeper that he only had a day and not to let them down. Then the leader told the protagonist to finish up and get the hell out of here. The protagonist said very calmly that the Tiger and his bandits had better get out of here. The leader was very much surprised. He asked the protagonist again what he had just said. He asked the Tiger in surprise if he had not understood what he had said. The leader menacingly asked the boy what he had called him. He struck the Tiger with a swinging blow. The leader collapsed to the ground exhausted and his gang members ran up to him. One of the bandits was surprised that the protagonist hit the Tiger very quickly. He asked the leader if he was okay. The Tiger replied menacingly to the protagonist. He prepared to get up and attack the guy. The gang leader accelerated and prepared to hit the protagonist with all his might. He hit the Tiger from the bottom with a very sudden uppercut. After the main character's punch, the Tiger flew headfirst into the ceiling and got stuck there. The gang members were very surprised at what happened to their leader. The protagonist had already completely calmed down and decided to address the remaining members of the gang. He told all the uninvited guests that they could get out while they were still in one piece. The protagonist told the bandits menacingly that if they came here again, he promised them they wouldn't get off that easy. The protagonist asked the bandits, wondering why they were kneeling before him. All the gang members got down on their knees and asked the guy to forgive them. They said they would never do it again. He asked the bandits with interest what exactly they meant. The beaten gang leader said they'd never bother Uncle Wang again. He asked the protagonist to let them go. He threatened the Tiger with severe punishment if he ever saw him on the street again. The protagonist looked at the bandits very sternly and menacingly and told them to go away. The gang members turned around and started to walk away quickly. They thanked the protagonist. The guy looked around the diner. He thought to himself that he had made quite a mess. The protagonist thought to himself, annoyed that he should have gotten the bandits out of here first. Uncle Wang came over at that time. He asked the protagonist with interest if his name was Chung. Uncle Wang was surprised to tell the protagonist that he was alive. The woman was also surprised to see him. The protagonist asked the diner owners in wonder if they remembered him. The owners of the diner cheered the guy. The woman said the main character always stood out. After a short pause, the protagonist said quite happily that he was back. Late at night, the protagonist returned to his apartment in a large apartment complex. He opened the front door and walked into the hallway. He called out to the girl Suni. Suddenly, the guy got very surprised and excited he saw the girl standing there. He told the quiet girl that she didn't answer her phone. He also added that he found a nice restaurant. Suddenly, the girl called out to some man. The protagonist was very surprised. The guy looked closely and noticed that a complete stranger was standing in front of him. The main character silently looked at the woman who had come in, but he could not recognize that Zia Joksue was standing in front of him. The main character asked the woman who she was. The headmistress called the guy by name. The woman told the guy that he made a big fuss at the front desk to see her, and now he doesn't even recognize her. I asked the woman with great interest what she was doing here. The woman told the guy that Sun and Sun's girlfriend was her best friend, so they often went to visit each other and she gave her a key. Sia asked the guy if he was living with Sun and Sun. The protagonist sadly said he had nowhere to live. He added that Sun was his landlord. The guy looked at the woman and decided there was no way she looked like she needed help anymore. He told the woman that the Sun girl wasn't home right now. He asked the director how things were going in the company. The principal said she couldn't get in touch with Sunbae's girlfriend. She asked the guy if he knew where she had gone. He asked the woman very excitedly if she had really not seen Sunbae. The protagonist worriedly thought to himself that something might have happened to his girlfriend's son. She could have been targeted by his enemies. The protagonist turned around and started to leave. The principal asked where he was going. He told the woman rudely that it was none of her business. The woman reminded the protagonist that he was looking for her and now he's just walking away from her. He turned around and told the woman very calmly not to follow him. After that, the headmistress waved goodbye to the guy. The headmistress thought to herself she was very much interested. The woman thought angrily that the protagonist was the first to dare tell her that. She even bit the nail on her finger because of her excitement. The woman instructed her subordinate to make inquiries about the protagonist, and nothing came of it. The director decided that the information about the protagonist was protected by the highest authorities, and an ordinary person could not get it. She thought he would be useful to her company. She left her family to start a business in Jiangcheng City. The protagonist walked around the city. He had no detailed information. He would have a hard time finding the girl. Sun and alone. Suddenly, something really caught the guy's attention and he stopped. He thought to himself that he had better not be late. He didn't want to have anything to do with one person, but he would have to. In the big Jianlong building, a man was working in his office on the top floor. The man was looking through a large window at the high-rise buildings in the metropolis. Suddenly the phone rang. The man went to his smartphone. The man said softly to himself, looking at the phone, that there were no more than 6 people in the world who knew his number. The man then resolutely picked up the phone and asked who was calling him. A man got a call from the main character. He told the person he was talking to not to even try to trace his number. The guy told the man that if he sends people to him, he will take his life. He asked the man to help him find his girlfriend's son's girlfriend, and she has not contacted him for more than 10 hours. At the end of the conversation, the protagonist said demandingly that he should know all the information in 5 minutes. After the conversation, the man turned off the phone to himself. He thought to himself that it had been 3 whole years. The man told himself that he had kept his phone for 3 whole years, and all that time he had been waiting for a call. The man smiled very unhappily at something of his own and called the protagonist Mr. Very soon, the protagonist received a call on his phone. The caller said that he had found information about the girl's son, and the interlocutor gave all the details about the girl, where she had been, and where she had called. The man asked the guy if a detailed report should be sent. He replied that a detailed report was not necessary. After the conversation, the protagonist thought for a long time. Finally, he realized what exactly happened. After a little thought, he realized that now he knew exactly where he had to go. Sun Girl was in the Jiangcheng People's Hospital at the time. The girl walked around the hospital building, going between the different wards. Sun was very excited. She needed to see someone at the hospital. The girl met her parents and told them that she had withdrawn all her deposits and sold her car and needed more money to pay for Hao Jie's surgery. The father told the girl that he could borrow more from a second uncle who had been doing well in business in recent years. The girl thought to herself that her uncle was the richest relative, but they had not gotten along well with him in recent years. That's why you don't want to ask him. Suddenly, someone from the side walked over and called out to the girl's father named Yoongui. The girl's uncle came over. He asked her father what had happened, that he was looking for him. Son, and thanked her aunt and uncle for responding. The girl and her parents were approached by an uncle named Sun Yunfu and an aunt named Dong Kaiju. The uncle looked carefully at his niece. She interested him very much. Uncle thought he hadn't seen Sun for a couple of years and he didn't realize she had become so beautiful. The uncle thought to himself in amazement at how he had not noticed his niece before. The girl's parents began to forgive the uncle to give him money to help save Haoja. After listening to the man and woman, the uncle told them calmly that he was sorry. I explained to my uncle that his business was going through a tough time and he had no money to spare. The uncle looked at the girl's father and decided there was no way he could pay him back. Son, and excitedly told her uncle that if the operation was not done now, Haoja might die. Afterwards, the aunt asked the uncle if he remembered what Mr. Lee had said at the Last Supper. The woman reminded her husband that they were joking about a candidate for Mr. Lee's son. Then the woman said that the girl is son and beautiful. If she marries Mr. Lee's son, the girl's uncle will be promoted. Uncle was very happy. He thought that although Mr. Lee's son was not in his right mind, he was definitely suitable for the girl. The aunt looked at the girl carefully and asked if she was looking for a boyfriend. A little hesitant, the girl said shyly that she didn't have a boyfriend right now. The woman told the girl that Haojae's life was more important than anything else, so she asked her aunt what she wanted to say. The aunt said Mr. Lee's son from the construction company went on a blind date. The woman said that if the girl marries Mr. Lee's son, her brother's illness will be forgotten. Now the whole family is counting on Suni. The girl was very much surprised and asked if she was really being asked to get married now. The aunt told the girl that if she married her son from the Lee family, she would no longer have to think about her brother's illness. The girl's father asked the woman if she really wanted him to sell his daughter. The aunt said that the father wouldn't have to sell his daughter to Sun, and it would be her personal choice if she wanted to marry. Auntie told the girl that her brother Haoze is only 14 years old. How can she watch a guy die quickly and quietly? The aunt told the girl that she was her brother's sister who was seeing him grow up. The father said sadly that he had never made much money in his life, and that's why his daughter would suffer now. The woman was very happy to herself that the family was ready to marry off her daughter after all. The uncle said it would be advantageous for the girl's family to join a wealthy family so there would be no money problems. The aunt recalled the expensive treatment of Haoze's brother. The voice of the main character suddenly sounded. He asked who wanted to marry his girlfriend, and everyone present was surprised. The girl was very surprised to see that the main character had come here. He asked the girl sternly why she'd not told him about her brother's illness. The main character said that he is the boyfriend of a girl, and this kind of news is too much for him. The girl's parents were surprised that their daughter had a boyfriend, and she had never told them about it. After that, the protagonist reached out and hugged the Sunbae girl in front of everyone. The main character cheerfully told the girl's mom that her daughter has a very shy personality. The aunt was surprised to recall that the girl had just said she didn't have a boyfriend. She told the main character that he was just pretending to be a boyfriend, Yuan, and the protagonist told his girlfriend romantically that she needed to prove that he was her boyfriend, and thought the protagonist was here to solve her problem. She should cooperate with him. After that, the girl realized that there was nothing to postpone and she had to kiss the main character. Without wasting much time, the girl reached for the guy and kissed him in front of everyone present. The uncle said he thought the main character was the girl's friend at first, but it turned out he was her boyfriend. The aunt said it was all very unexpected. The uncle reminded the girl that the amount of the operation for her brother was very large, and not every man could afford it. He said that he had already paid more than $400,000 on the way here. The uncle asked the guy to show him the coupon he was supposed to get after the payment. The protagonist thought to himself that in reality he hadn't paid yet. He said that he made the payment so that the girl would not marry someone else. After a short pause, the protagonist said that the money went not to the hospital but to Dr. E, who is the best and will cure Haoji. The aunt suspiciously asked the guy why she had never heard of any Dr. E. The guy thought to himself that this woman better be a detective because she's hard to fool. Then he said he was the doctor. The uncle was very much surprised. He laughed and didn't believe that the main character was a doctor. At this time, a doctor came out into the corridor and asked those present if they were relatives of the patient. The doctor very sternly told those present to behave themselves in the hospital. The uncle was surprised and delighted to find out that his familiar doctor named Chu was standing in front of him. The uncle rushed to the doctor and said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He reminded him that they had been together once before. Dr. Chu got excited. He saw something interesting off to the side and didn't pay attention to his uncle. Dr. Chu then shoved his uncle aside and ran towards the protagonist. The doctor greeted the guy very politely and excitedly and shook his hand. The doctor said he was glad to see the guy here. He added that his eyes were opened after the incident at Shen's house. The uncle was very much surprised that the doctor ran up to the protagonist and he was familiar with him. The girl's parents were also surprised that the protagonist told them the truth. The Sun girl was very surprised. She had no idea that the guy she knew was a doctor. The protagonist was not very happy to meet the doctor under these circumstances at the hospital. After a short pause, the guy smiled and greeted Dr. Chu. The protagonist told Dr. Chu that they had seen him here. The doctor hesitated to answer. After some thought, the doctor reminded the boy that the last time they'd seen each other was at Shen's house. The protagonist got a little worried. He didn't want to remember the incident at Mr. Shen's house. The girl's parents were very surprised and didn't understand why Sun hadn't told them before that her boyfriend was a doctor. The doctor said that he had previously mistaken the protagonist for a charlatan who cheats rich people. At that time, my uncle intervened in the conversation. He asked Dr. Chu how a scum like the protagonist could be called a doctor. The uncle thought confidently to himself that the protagonist was an unscrupulous charlatan. Then Dr. Q asked with great interest what kind of man was standing opposite them. Ichen called the girl's uncle a noisy stranger. Dr. Chu then snapped his fingers and called out to the hospital guards. The doctor told the guards that the aunt and uncle had been making noise and disturbing other patients from the beginning. Dr. Chu told the guards slyly that he suspected the aunt and uncle might have rabies. He suggested that they be placed in a dispensary. The uncle and aunt started to resist and shouted to be let go. The guards were taking them out of the building at the same time. The protagonist told Dr. Chu that he had ordinary skills but ruthless methods. The doctor replied to the guy that his aunt and uncle were disrespectful to him. At that time, a Sun girl came up to the protagonist and touched his sleeve. Sun and asked the protagonist to help them. She promised him that he would be reimbursed for the cost of the operation. Dr. Chu then introduced the protagonist as Dr. E to everyone around him. Dr. Chu told his colleagues that after a while, he would take over Haoji's surgery and be personally responsible for him. Afterwards, Dr. Chu asked the protagonist how he felt about starting the operation. The girl thanked Dr. Chu. The protagonist asked Dr. Chu anxiously if he could really perform the Haoji operation. Dr. Chu assured the protagonist that there would be absolutely no problem. I gave Dr. Tsu a separate prescription. He said it was a needle insertion technique. It would improve his medical skills. The protagonist handed the doctor the prescription. Dr. Chu thought to himself with surprise that he had now obtained the lost key and blood needle technique that would help him greatly. The protagonist then took out his bank card and wanted to pay for the services. He asked Dr. Tsu how much the services would cost and assured him that he would pay for everything. The doctor said fearfully that no money was needed. Dr. Chu told everyone around him very confidently that he would handle everything himself. Sun girl and was very much surprised that the protagonist paid the entire amount for the Haoji surgery. The parents and their daughter looked at the main character and thought he was a saint. After leaving the hospital, the parents told the girl to rest and come home. Sunan agreed. The father walked over to his daughter and told her quietly that he had a question for her. The father reminded the girl that she's in a relationship with the main character and they're living together. Then the father reminded the girl that she wasn't married to the guy yet and they shouldn't forget about contraception. After an awkward confusion, the daughter angrily shouted at her father that he was talking nonsense. The protagonist told the girl that he didn't realize her father was so concerned about safety. The girl angrily asked the guy how dare he eavesdrop on other people's conversations. He said calmly that he had acute hearing. Sunan told the annoyed guy not to make excuses. She added that they would get home by car. Suddenly a hunch struck the girl and she remembered she didn't have a car. Sunan told the protagonist that she had pawned the car. She added that she would try to buy it back. He took his keys out of his pocket and asked the girl if she had left them for him. The main character holding the keys asked the girl when she had time to pawn the car. The girlfriend was very surprised. She noticed that the keys in the guy's hands looked exactly like her keys. He said he accidentally bumped into the mortgage company. Then he took the keys and reminded the girl not to lose them next time. The protagonist got a little worried when he saw the girl come right up to him. Sunan hugged the protagonist. He would be very much and pleasantly surprised by this. After a short pause, the girl shyly thanked the protagonist. The main character hugged the girl. He said he should thank her. After a short pause, the guy wanted to tell the girl something very important. The main character was driving with his girlfriend late at night in her car. The girl, after a long pause, asked the guy why he was helping her and what he was grateful for. Sunan asked the guy if he was doing her a lot of favors for letting her live in her house. The protagonist responded by intriguingly telling the girl that she would find out for herself tomorrow. Sunan asked the guy suspiciously what the intrigue was. The protagonist was amused by the girl's impatience. Suddenly, the girl told the guy that the car was getting chilly if the air conditioner was broken. The protagonist was very frightened. He realized the reason for the cold in the car. The boy thought to himself that the cause of the chill was the spirit of extermination that had arisen. The protagonist strictly commanded the girl not to ask anything and to do whatever she says. The main character opened the front door of the car. The girl asked, wondering what he was doing. The main character got ready to leave and told the girl to go straight home without stopping. Then the guy told the girl that whatever she heard or saw, she should not stop and must go home. He also told Sun and to take his cell phone and hide in his room. The main character told the girl to call his last contact from his cell phone. He told the girl to ask for the strongest man on the phone to be sent to her home within 30 minutes. The guy promised the girl that he would save her. The protagonist jumped out of the car and landed confidently on his feet. The guy watched the car with his girlfriend drive off down the night and deserted street. He thought to himself that ordinary people would not be able to survive the battle of the martial artists. and there was a girl beside him now, and it was dangerous. The guy thought to himself that fighting alone was not so easy. It was best to have someone in command. The protagonist was thinking about what to do now when a car came up behind him. Two passengers got out of the car. He thought it was time to meet his adversary. The protagonist looked at the driver who got out and thought he wasn't much of a threat. The guy looked at the people who had arrived and wondered who might be a threat. He saw that only the man who got out of the car could pose a threat. The man said he hadn't heard the name of Feng in 5 years. He didn't think anyone had survived from the Yi family. The protagonist asked the man if he had intervened in the incident at the villa 5 years ago. He also asked him if the man had come here to kill him. The man said the main character didn't deserve to be killed. He added that the guy had a very high opinion of himself. Then the man ordered his subordinate named Huang Qing to attack the protagonist. Then the driver pushed off the ground and accelerated to attack the guy. The driver ran at full speed to crush the protagonist immediately. As the rival prepared to grab the protagonist, he shouted at him to die. He looked at the enemy running at him without any excitement and prepared to fight back. The protagonist, using his fighting skills, began to fight off the driver who attacked him. I was very calmly willing to tell my opponent that he's really weak. The protagonist prepared to retaliate by attacking his opponent with his own hands. He hit the driver who attacked him in the face with his hand with all his might. The protagonist confidently crushed his opponent and shouted at him that he was weak. At the end of a very severe beating, the driver collapsed on the ground unconscious. The man looked at the driver and told the protagonist it was useless to give him a chance. He told the man that he couldn't die as easily as his driver did. The man surprisingly told the guy that he had activated a skill called Evil Spirit Blood. The man called himself by the name of Yao Jinggu. He told the boy that he had achieved great perfection in 5 years and he would give him the opportunity to die today. The protagonist told the man calmly that he was talking a lot of nonsense. Yao Jinggu told the guy very menacingly that he was the one who killed his entire family 5 years ago. The man told the protagonist that Huang Qing didn't even have time to take a step and was killed with a single blow. He added that the guy's skills weren't that simple. After that, the man said it was over for the protagonist. The man gave the boy an angry look and offered to be his dog. Then the man said that Huang Qing was a good subordinate to him, but now the protagonist could take his place. The guy calmly turned to the Yao man and said that he was taking a lot on himself. The main character said, "The man relies a lot on his amateur kung fu." Afterward, the protagonist asked if Yao hadn't noticed something important in the process. He told the angry man that his weakness was only an illusion. Immediately, the Yao man was very much frightened because of the intense tension. The man looked at the protagonist and realized that he was of master level. The protagonist once again told the man that he would not die as easily as his subordinate. Yao thought fearfully that China could not have such a young master. The man remembered that he had been perfecting himself for 40 years. He had spent a lot of effort and wealth on it, and he had only barely become a master. At the same time, Yao felt his hands shaking. The man became agitated because of this. Looking at his hands, the man couldn't understand why he was shaking. After gathering his strength, the man shouted to the protagonist not to be proud. I told the guy that he couldn't imagine how he'd made it big in a couple years. He reminded him that they had a big gap in experience. The protagonist looked calmly at his opponent. He could not understand what kind of breakup he was talking about. The man prepared to attack. He shouted that today he would blow the main character's head off. After that, the man accelerated and ran at full speed towards the boy. He watched calmly as the hand of his enemy approached him and prepared to defend himself. After which, the man in flight shouted menacingly to the protagonist that he was going to die. The guy stood still and calmly looked at his opponent. He wasn't worried in the slightest. At the very last moment, the protagonist calmly bounced aside from Yao's attack. After that, the guy punched the man back. Yao continued to attack the protagonist back. Gradually, bloody marks appeared on the guy's hands after the claw attacks on the Yao's arm. After another unsuccessful attack, the Yao man landed. He realized that he was a very strong opponent. The man told the guy that he was good at blocking his deadly attacks, but he had thin arms. I asked the guy how much longer he could block. The guy's hands were covered in blood. He thought to himself that his opponent had hurt him far more than he had realized. The guy said he underestimated the man. He asked what he should do about the scratches now. The man looked and shouted, very surprised at the protagonist for being completely hard-headed. Suddenly, something very much attracted and frightened the man Yao. He looked at his hands. Yao noticed with great fear that he had broken his fingers in his attack against the protagonist. The protagonist cheerfully recalled the man telling him about some gap in experience. The guy looked at his opponent and prepared to attack him with his magic demons. The main character very calmly approached a man named Yao Jinggu. He pounced on his rival from above in flight. He shouted that the man would pay in blood today. The angry man stood waiting to attack the guy in return. Yao looked at the guy with great attention. He realized that he wanted to attack him in the air. The man got excited. He realized he had a chance. He thought the guy was very inexperienced. Yao thought that the protagonist in the air had nowhere to go. He now tried to concentrate all his chi energy in one hand. Putting all the energy into one hand, the man decided to finish the guy off with a big rip. Yao was able to chop off the main character's legs in flight with a powerful kick. The man thought to himself excitedly that he would see how the guy would fight without legs. Suddenly the man was very much surprised and frightened by what he saw. I realized he hadn't just attacked the main character, but a transformed illusion. The man was scared. He realized he was about to be attacked by an outside protagonist. At this time, Ichen flew overhead at his opponent in silence. Yao stood there, unsuspecting. After that, the protagonist hit very hard and threw Yao against the ground with all his might.